Every innovation first began with an idea. Welcome to Tech Founders Stories, where passion meets innovation. The platform where visionary founders share their inspiring journeys. From struggles to successes, they reveal the secrets behind their innovative ventures. Join us as we uncover the stories behind the startups that shape our world.
My name is Audu Desmond from Kogi State. I currently have a background in legal studies, law from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. I am a partner at Proptech Roundup Africa, and also I have a project which I also am the founder, Built Environment Insights Africa. So I come from a family where my godfather is a computer scientist. So while I was young, at the age of 10, my father had already, put me in a position where I have to be with him all the time when he was running his computer center. Right. So before the age of 11, I'd already had some background knowledge in my way around computers. And this was as early back as 2004, where the literacy level was really high. Right. So up until my university days, this was just generally the knowledge I used to navigate my way until I got to the university. So while I was in university, right, I, had this idea that I wanted to, document experiences, right? So I learned video editing, right, to just basically document my class guys and some other things, right? So after a particular video I had done, I wanted to do something better. So I needed a camera, right? So it was in trying to look for a camera that I met with a friend of mine who was a programmer then. His name is Larry. Hey, Larry Okeke. He was my classmate. So I went to him and, tried to get a camera from him, right? So while we were discussing, he saw my computer where I was trying to edit something. So he was the person who actually told me to, what is the word for it? To redirect my direction, if I should put it that way. So he was the person that told me to switch to programming and transition, right? So I believe that was the genesis of it. So we became really good friends. He built some products back then, and we tried to push it around campus, and it was an exciting time. And I think that was it. This particular project, which I like to call Built Environment Insights Africa, is more of a data-driven project, unlike the first, which was born out of sort of like an eureka moment. So the first is called quicklet. So basically what quicklet tried to do was to, make access to homes more affordable and secured, and also payments more flexible, right? So that was like the first project. It was just an eureka. I had the inspiration to do this, and I just tried to do it with a friend of mine. Right, so we faced some challenges. One of those challenges was getting access to investor funding. We tried to go through some accelerator programs, went to even YC, startup school, met with a lot of founders globally, right, and shared insights. But we could not secure investor funding. So what that meant was we had to build out from our personal purse. And it was only a matter of time before we had to shut down, right? So with time, I started to, as the year progressed, meet up with other founders who we are also building at the intersection of housing, real estate, and finance. Something we like to call property technology, right? And I realized that, they were faced with similar problems. Most of them had issues, even though they were trying to build innovative products and projects, they had issues with, having access to global visibility, investor activity, and stuff like that. And so we realized that the biggest problem facing them was the ecosystem does not have a lot of data that investors can rely on, because some of these investors who invest in blockchain, fintech, and the rest of them, right, they rely on ecosystem data, right? So when they want to invest, they go into different ecosystems across Africa or Europe and try to know what is happening in these areas, and upon this information they make their investment decisions, right? So PropTech, being a novel area in Nigeria and Africa at large, did not have access to those kind of visibility, right? So we came to the conclusion that the first thing to do was to create ecosystem data, right? Like who is building, who have built, who has raised, right? to, provide data as to government reforms and government policies, right? So that investors can see that this is a favorable environment to come into and invest into startups, right? So built environment Insights Africa is, unlike my first, a data-driven project spun out of the lacuna we saw between the builders and the investors. So if you recall, I made mention of the fact that it is still a novel ecosystem. So investor activities are not much. For instance, last year, Africa recorded just a paltry $3.2 million in investor funding. And the year before that, we recorded at least something in the region of 60 million. So if you compare that to other sectors, you see this is really small, unlike fintech that has seen more than 100 million, right? So one of the problems around this is the fact that we have slow adoption. Why do we have slow adoption? It is because, unlike other sectors that rely on just the software infrastructure, property technology relies also on the physical infrastructure, I beg your pardon. Right? So what this means is you need to drive adoption before local players, like the real estate players, like the construction guys, like those who are into mortgage financing, right? And these are people who, there is a sort of like a modus operandi which they operate with, right? So driving adoption before them has been difficult, right? So I believe these are the biggest problems that we have faced, right? So the way we go around it is to go to different ecosystems, right? Link up with players and try to have sort of like a conference or a symposium. We've done this in Ghana. We partnered with some guys. We did a little conference there. We tried to partner with some guys in Morocco as well to do a Proptech real estate conference. So what is the objective of these conferences, right? It is to allow innovators come in with their technology and exhibit, to allow local players come into the space and witness how technology can make their operations more seamless, right? It is also an opportunity for us to invite the guys who would fund, which are the VCs, institutional players, and other guys, right, to come into the space and see how collaboration is going on between government agencies, between traditional players and the innovators, which are the founders, right? And it is upon this ecosystem collaboration and integration that these VCs can now, bring out their funding into the ecosystem and scale growth. So the major problem is driving local players, getting local players to adopt. And the way we are going around it is having ecosystem conferences, right? And it is still a work in progress. There are different stages of wow moments for me. So the first wow moment really was when I tried to launch Quicklet. Right, I remember it just like yesterday. We were in New Haven, right, with a friend of mine. And so when we launched, it coincided with when they had released the first batch of coppers to different cities, right? So we got a lot of requests that day. In fact, I remember that I was almost panicking, right, as to how we could manage these users, right? So that was like the first thing that made me realize, or the first moment that I came to the realization that, okay, this is not just in my head, right? So the second eureka moment would be when I became the ambassador of Proptech Boss. So Proptech Boss is a global company that tried to, adopt as many Proptech companies across the world, right? So when I became an ambassador for Proptech Boss in Africa, I think for me it was an eureka moment, right? It was a turning point. It prepositioned me to connect with as many founders in Africa as possible, right? I think the third moment was when we, got into this collaboration with Imotech. Imotech is an event company in Morocco, right? So they were looking to, because they are into ecosystem acceleration, right? And they have been doing conferences for like 2 years with some of their guys in Northern Africa and Europe as well. So they were looking to have like an expansion, right, into the southern and western parts of Africa, right? So when they reached out to us to come in as partners, I think for me it was an eureka moment. It was like a turning point. I was really happy and inspired. So I think I would start with Proptech Roundup Africa. So what Proptech Roundup Africa does is it provides investor insights, right? So we have something we call Proptech Roundup, right? So at the end of the year, we go into different areas of property technology and sustainability and try to see what startups have raised, right? Try to know the stage they are raising in, the stage they have raised in. Is the funding disclosed? Is it undisclosed, right? We also try to collaborate with ecosystems, right, to have symposiums, right, where founders can come and speak on the projects they are working on, right? So what this does, it helps founders to have the right kind of visibility before the right audience. And the right audience are investors and government agents, right? So now with built environment in South Africa, right, we are expanding our scope of focus. So with Proptech Roundup, we were primarily focused on property technology, right? So but with built environment, going from data, we now offer insights to Proptech, to construction, to sustainability and other areas like clean tech and climate tech, right? So what this does is we look at the startups in these areas, what they are raising, what they raised in the previous year. We try to know why there is a progress, if there are, or why there are reduced funding, right? These are the things that help us to ascertain the right kind of investors that they can work with, to ascertain the investor confidence in the sector and products they are working on, right? So we basically work with founders from time to time to understand the funding stage they are in, their traction, what they have been able to achieve in their milestone, as these are the data that we collect and provide to the right investors who rely upon them to, follow up on their growth, right? And determine if they are ripe enough for the next round of fundraising. Luckily for us, I like to describe this as a project really, and it was not begun with the intent to generate revenue. It is just primarily for now to drive the ecosystem, subsequent to when it is ripe enough for investor activity, right? So right now we are bootstrapping, right? And when the situation requires us to, accelerate ecosystem as we have done in the past, we work with strategic partners, some of whom could finance this project, right, to drive this adoption. We've seen a lot of challenges really, but I think the most important challenge for me, which is still something we try to be better at, is really to continue to push yourself really. I think for me it is to continue to push myself. I realize that as I get older, the drive is not the same, so of course I can say the challenge would be funding, as with everybody, but I realize as a principle, as long as you continue to put yourself in the right direction, right, you would eventually hit milestones. And when I look at my journey, I've had instances where I hit milestones, right? So for me, it is just the will to keep moving, and moving in the right direction. So ultimately, my challenge is myself. It depends on, the segments of the family you are looking for. So my father I like to describe him as a more, when it comes to venturing out with your life career, he can be more liberal as to the methods you adopt, as long as you guys have a proper discussion and you are able to, outline your visions for him. My mother is more conservative, so whatever you are saying, you have to still go and, get that degree and become a lawyer. So I think for me, the major challenge I experienced was largely from my mother, because when I started out, I actually had to defer my admission, right? So it was a big deal to my mom. So a bit of stubbornness here and there, because it is not really it is not, the whole discussion is not primarily logical. There are moments where you have spasms of emotions, right? So whatever you are saying, if you don't, come down to the language that everybody understands, nobody wants to understand, right? So it now boils down to, if you have the will to do what you said you will do. And I think that was what I did, to just, will myself out of the situation and just go and do what I wanted to do. And then with time, everybody came along, right? And I'm happy that as we began to progress together, we were able to find a level playing field for everyone and negotiate on areas that require negotiations. So using myself as a yardstick, when you ask from a third person perspective, the kind of person I am, most people would describe me, and this is way back from when I was younger, as a sort of shy, if not timid. Shy would be trying to be politically correct, timid would be the word. So what that meant was, whenever I want to do something, what happens is you may have second thoughts as to, if this is the right decision to take, if you should consult with a third party. And when you consult with a third party, you may realize that what you want to do is probably unconventional, so much so that what you will get are negative feedbacks as to why this would not work and why you should not do it. All right? And so when you find yourself in this environment for a long time, you may begin to see reasons with these third-party suggestions, third-party decisions actually, which come in the form of suggestions. So what happens is you do not eventually move ahead with your plan. This, my friend, is the introduction to having or lacking confidence, right? So you would realize the implication of your not taking that step eventually as you progress and you begin to meet those who had lesser knowledge, who had lesser background, who had lesser skill, boldly take on their ventures and go on to become successful in them, right? So if I could go back, I think what I would want to do is to be more audacious, right? To just, if I wanted to just do it, right? And, learn from it, refine as you progress, execute first, refine later, right? So I think if I should go back, I would want to be more audacious. I actually put it into actionable plans. So of late, there have been, results in the things we do. Some of the people who meet us be like, how do you guys do this? How did you guys do that? How do you guys do that? Right? And this was because of the fact that when the idea came, we collected enough data to support us and we struck, right? And when we do that, it comes off as something, momentous, right? But if you look at me from my journey, I wouldn't have, been able to do this in the past, right? So I think anybody who is coming up, if I should tell myself that, would be to be more bold. So there are recipes, right? Recipes is like when you are trying to cook, you're trying to make stew or something. So it's like there are recipes to arrive at a good cuisine, right? So one of the recipe is that you must be somebody who is driven from within, really, and not necessarily someone whose actions are spawned from external validations, right? So you have to start small. You have to be somebody who says, I want to eat rice, and then you just go and eat rice, and then you develop to, I want to learn how to drive a car, and then you go and drive a car, and then you develop to, I want to build an app, and then you go and build an app. So you have to be somebody who is internally driven. So that's the first thing, because this is really important. As you navigate your journey, you are going to get a lot of negative remarks, right? So if you were not internally driven at first, and you are somebody who based your actions off external validations, it is very easy to take this outside data and say, okay, I think we need to call it a quit, right? But if what is pushing you is coming from within, you know, as people just keep speaking, you just keep moving. So this is the first thing. So it must come from within, right? Your inspiration must come from within, right? The next thing is you have to equip yourself with knowledge. So it's not to just be bold and just start spewing rubbish, right? You want to have industry knowledge of what you are getting yourself into, right? So you can do anything, but you need to know what you are doing, right? And the way to know what you are doing is to equip yourself with the prerequisite knowledge, right? Then the next thing, which I also think is of equal importance, is you need to develop grit, which some people like to describe as persistence, perseverance, or whatever word you like to call it. And this last one, which is the grit, is predicated upon the first one, which is the inner drive, right? So the grit is, okay, so you want to build an app, you have this inspiration to build an app, and then you already thought that, okay, when you build, you're going to onboard 10k users, you're going to raise 100k in funding, you start balling, right? And so you already have a timeline. So you go into building, right? And then, you have to build with something. So you build with your resources, right? And then you start running out of resources, right? And then your team starts developing low morale, right? And then when you push into the market does not adopt, right? So if you don't have that grit or the persistence or the perseverance to keep moving, right, you would, I don't know, give up or whatever the word is. You would just let go easily, right? And it could be that the reason why you are not having the desired results is because of one minor issue here or there. If only you would just calm down a little bit and look at it again or try again, right? So, of course, it boils down to the first thing I've said. If your actions are spurred out of external validations, it is easier for you to to not have sufficient grit, because when you start pushing and someone laughs, that is feedback, so, you might give up. So to recap, the three things are, your drive must come from within, right? So, for Christians, if you're a Christian, you hear something like, he that is in me is greater than he that is in the world, right? So your drive must come from within, So if it is physics, you say something like an object in motion, or a body at rest would be at rest until hit by an external force, and will be in motion until, it is stopped by the same external force or other forces, right? So if you look at this principle, you see that the principle that applies is an external body is moving an external body, right? So it is that external body that can stop the external body because it is what is moving it, right? So what has to come from you has to be from within. So if it is from within, it is difficult from what is external to stop you. So the first thing is inner drive. Then the next thing is you need to equip yourself with some knowledge. If you don't have knowledge, it will be like, sort of like, what they say, empty noise, empty barrel, right? So when you equip yourself with knowledge, your knowledge becomes your compass. Your knowledge becomes your compass as you navigate your way, right? So if you want to do this, if you want to build an app, you equip yourself with knowledge and it becomes sort of like the map that you use to navigate, right? So the third thing you need grit. You can call it perseverance or whatever. So the grit is, as you begin to progress, right, you already had your blueprint of what you wanted to achieve, your milestone and stuff like that. But you will not always either hit your target, your plans will not always work out. People would say whatever it is they say, right? So if you do not have sufficient grit or perseverance, it is easier for you to give up. Where we are headed is to reimagine the built environment, what we like to describe as the built environment, right? So to give you perspective, buildings account for 40% of global gas emissions, right? So there are discussions globally that, the atmosphere is being polluted. There are discussions that the high cost, houses are becoming, very expensive to either own or rent. There are discussions that around the areas of sustainability, buildings. We have a lot of, collapsed buildings, right? Buildings that are not very resistant to climate occurrences like earthquake, and stuff like that. Just general discussions, right? And we have innovators that are building there, right? So if you see the direction that Nigeria, for instance, which is our point of contact, is moving towards, we are moving towards a future where it will be difficult for the average young man or woman, probably in 20s or 30s, to buy a house or to build a house. You have to be at a certain income level to build your own house. And this is because houses are generally expensive, right? When you ask the builders, they say the materials are expensive, So what that means is we need to begin to, carry out research in alternative areas, alternative building construction approaches, right? Like we need to look at modular homes, prefabricated homes, right? So another thing is we need to look at in the area of sustainability, right? Look at things like, so even if we build these homes or construct these buildings, right? How do we ensure that they last, they stand the test of time? So we've seen instances where if you go to Lagos, you see structures that collapsed and people died. We have some of these instances in some other places in Africa, right? So this is where sustainability comes in. How do we build something that can last? So we begin to look at light steel homes. We begin to look at some of these homes that they use, materials that are not primarily cement, right? How do we have intelligent homes where people can be properly secured, right? So this is the direction of housing. So our role is to try to accelerate this process, to accelerate the areas of research as people go into research to explore other areas of construction approaches. Our role is to help to accelerate these research processes. Our role is to help accelerate investor interest, because the builders can't do this on their own. They need to be invested into, right? Our role is to help accelerate government reforms, right? Because even if the builders are building and the investors are ready to invest, if the government does not come, into play and to, create sort of like a level playing field or create some sort of incentive, whether by tax or what have you, giving, as they have done in Lagos, sort of like a place where they like to describe as a free trade zone, like this Lekki Ekpe, where they are building a modern futuristic city that they call Etana, right? If government does not come into this and create reforms and give incentives, free trade zones, would not be able to achieve our overall objective, right? So our goal is to accelerate ecosystem, to accelerate investor interest, to accelerate government reforms, right? So we see ourselves as probably transition into institutional VCs in the future, but that can be like a future goal. For now, what we want to do is to, go to different ecosystems. Our primary goal right now is to go into different ecosystems, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, right? And, bring out builders who would come into the space and create diverse startups and decarbonize the built environment in Africa. I think that the problem we have these days with tech, as opposed to when we first started, we saw people who wanted to do a lot of things because they found it exciting, so they were passionate, right? Or they saw it as an avenue to create value to their immediate community and broader society at large, right? So it turned out that those people eventually started to reap some reward by way of getting remote jobs, having more visibility in the ecosystem, right? And then what this did was we now saw an influx of newer set of people who were more interested in the limelight, right? And who wanted to become a part of the get quick rich scheme, or whatever it is they call it, right? So primarily, I think if we had to go back to a time or to experience a future where we would see more growth, more innovation, if I should put it that way, because to give you an insight, when we had actual people who are passionate and people who sort of wanted to give value, what this did was it actually accelerated investor activity. So, Enugu, for instance, small Enugu saw startup like Zen Finance, which secured, I think, about 2.4 in investor funding, and an additional 1.5, right? And some other guys who got grants, right? So investors themselves are not, foolish. They see people who are actively creating value, right? So now that we begin to see influx of people who like the limelight and fall into the hype of wanting to, get rich quickly through tech, we have seen lesser pace of innovation, right? So we should see more progress than before. So to, achieve the future that we all desire, we need to go back to the past. We need to adopt the method of the past. So anybody who is coming into tech who is trying to create impact, right, should be somebody who has sort of like raw passion. I don't know if everybody keeps saying passion, but you need to have some sort of obsession, if I should put it that way, with the technology itself, right? You need to be interested in this tool as a concept, right? You need to be interested in the direction it is taking. You need to be interested in the people. You need to be interested in the value. You need to be interested in how you can create a nexus between the people and the technology, right? And you need to have, just as we have said, you need to be driven from the inside. You need to have some knowledge. You need to have some perseverance. And I believe that with time, you'll be able to create desired results.